Hey, trainers. Welcome back to the channel. I'm thrilled to bring you the latest scoop on Pokémon Unite. Today, we're diving headfirst into the dynamic world of new nerfs and buffs that are about to reshape our tier list in 2024. If you're a fan of strategic gameplay and staying ahead of the competition, you're in for a treat. So, buckle up, hit that like button, and let's get started. Today we are talking about nerfs and buffs because I'm doubting it, I think they were fake leaked patch notes yesterday. But without question we have a change coming to the game very soon. We should have an update this week in just a couple of days here with some balance changes to the game. It looks like it's going to be on the 22nd. However, we have Pokemon Day coming up on the 27th, so we could see something there. It's a good time to talk about Pokemon that need buffs, nerfs, and the overall balance of the game. I'm going to go through every single Pokemon right now, and I'm going to give you my take on why they might need a BU, why they might need a nerf, or why they might be somewhat balanced. Let's take a look at our tiers for this week. We have our huge buff category. Pretty self-explanatory. We have a little buff category. These are Pokemon that probably have one move set that needs some love, but overall are fine. We have our B tier. I don't know, man, it's not going anywhere. Still got the beads here, and this is going to be where we put all of our Pokemon that I don't think they need to mess with at all. We have our little maybe nerf category. I don't want these Pokemon gutted, but something must be done. We have our nerf this with fire category. This is for Pokemon that are just way too strong and need nerfs kind of across the board. And then we have our X category. In fact, let's start talking about our X category right now. Mutwo X. Mew, Zacian, where are you, buddy? And then Meriden coming to the game will all be X Pokemon as of right now. I think you could probably still slightly nerf Mutwo X and Y. Honestly, the last time I saw Zacian, it was not as good as it used to be at all. After the changes in Mutwo X and Y are getting nerfs in the public test server. Right now, Mutwo X and Y are requiring AOS energy or not requiring, but they use AS energy when they use their Mega Gauge, so the more AS energy they have, the longer their Mega Gauge would last. But if they have very little AS energy, their Mega Gauge doesn't last as long. It's actually a pretty good nerf to these Pokemon. I think all of these Pokemon have been nerfed, and also they're all EX Pokemon, so I'm not even sure we're going to see them in ranked next season. That being said, right now, especially until Meriden comes out and we know what's going on with EX Pokemon, sure, you could lightly nerf all three of these. It wouldn't be crazy, but I actually think you can probably hold off on these Pokemon at least until we see what this X change looks like for the Mute. And then again with Zacian, I honestly think it recently kind of got hurt pretty bad by its recent nerfs. Now that we have our EX Pokemon taken care of, let's just start moving on. I'm just going to go through the roster kind of in order right here. Cinderace is an auto attacker. I think in general a lot of the auto attackers could use little tiny buffs. I wouldn't want them to do a ton with them. Cinder did just get a nice buff out of Pyro Ball Feint. I think it could still use a little bit more. In general, these Pokemon are good but could use a little something to get back in the meta. Greninja is right there with them. The same thing applies to Duraludon. I would say even though Duraludon, Greninja, Cinderace are all carry Pokemon that all do pretty well, I don't think that they're stellar in the meta. Especially in tournament play, you just really never see these Pokemon. Another one that could use a little buff, not to its Spirit Shackle build, but probably to something with its Razor Leaf build. I don't know what you do with it. It's a fun build, but Decidus is extremely squishy for sort of the lifesteal and needing to be somewhat around enemies. For this build to really sing, you could do a little something to this Pokemon. If any of them were going to be in the B tier, it would actually be Dewey. All right. Moving on here, Garchomp could use a little buff. This is to the ground build. It could actually use a little rework too. The ground build Dragon is great. Otherwise, this Pokemon's great, but a little buff to that move set would be absolutely decent. Same thing with Gengar. You can't buff this Pokemon in a massive way because it is a speedster that can snowball the entire enemy team, but there's no question that as a speedster like that, it really isn't crushing it in a lot of these games. CRRA could use a little buff to its Surf Hurricane build. Doesn't need to be massive, it just doesn't really fully compete with some of the other mages inside the game. I think it's close, but it could use a little love. Up next, we have a Lawn Ninetales. I don't really think you need to mess with it. I think it's doing good with both builds right now. I'm a lot not enough people are playing like Dazzling Gleam Aurora Veil, it's actually pretty good right now, and Blizzard Avalanche. Even though it got nerfed a little while back, it's still a super solid build. Wiggly is kind of the same way Wiggly is. One of the harder ones because you could do something with rollout, but it's such a hard move to balance. Like sure, you could come up with a little buff for it. But the thing about rollout is it's just a crazy play style. It has some really amazing moments and some moments that are not so great. I probably wouldn't touch Wiggly, especially since we just got buffs for it. Macamp, the winner of the AUS Cup playing in North America. Yes, I do still need this Pokemon. I still think this Pokemon needs a little buff, not something insane. A lot of things in the game are not crazy unbalanced, right? There aren't an insane amount of Pokemon that we need to nerf like crazy or buff like crazy. Macamp just hasn't been super relevant in a long time, and I think a little buff here or there could put it back in relevance. Absol, I think, is doing fine. As a speedster, I don't think you can expect too much else out of a Absol right now, and again with all these speedsters, they're really close to being broken. Talonflame maybe could use a slight buff. Its damage output could be a little higher, or you could lower its cooldowns a little bit. That's probably what I would want to see with Talon, is a slight cooldown reduction, but it's also pretty good. If you said Talon was B, I couldn't really argue it because, again, speedsters are just so crazy hard to balance. Now we have Slow Bro. Slow Bro has been great for a long time. It did get a recent nerf, but I don't think you'd want to mess with this Pokemon at all. It's still really good in all aspects in the game, so I think B is super fair for this Pokemon. Don't touch it. Mr. Mime. Mr. Mime is a weird one. You could kind of buff this a little, and it wouldn't be nuts, but it's actually doing pretty well, especially with the addition of Resident Guard for competitive. You'd probably want some slight changes, but Mime is good. It's actually pretty good, and it's been doing well. It just has a weird place in the meta, being a tank while also being a support that doesn't heal that well. I don't know. I'm a little split on mine. I'm going to put it in the B tier. Venusaur, I think, could use a little baby nerf. Here's the thing. Let's just look at these Pokemon. Black Esto and Venusaur could both use baby nerfs, but they're not so broken that you really have to mess with them. I'd be fine if they didn't touch either of these Pokemon. I really would, but they are on the high end of being a little too good. In fact, what probably is necessary in general is just another slight Slick Spoon nerf for some of these Pokemon. They're just a little too good as special attackers with that item. And then Blastoise and Minosaur, especially after the level 7 emote, maybe they're a little too strong. I would be happy with both of these in the don't touch category, but I also could recognize that both of these Pokemon could use a little nerf for sure. Alright, we're taking a look at Lucario. Next, Lucario is, I don't know, you could slightly buff extreme speed. You could keep it where it is. It's getting competitive play. It's good solo. It's gotten power crept a little, but more importantly, it just feels like it's gotten crowd control crept a little bit. I could see it being the little buff, but I'm fine if they don't touch Lucario for a while. Same thing with Igo's amazingly good. You could slightly nerf it. You could slightly nerf all supporters. This isn't one of the big ones I'm worried about. I think it's doing pretty good. Crustal, okay, so here's where my bias comes in. You could nerf this thing. I don't really want him to touch it. I don't think so. Like, I kind of don't. I don't mind something being really good. What I do mind is when something is so good to not have it is a huge problem. So yes, you could give this thing a little tiny baby nerf. You could, but I'm kind of okay with it being in the beats tier. I really am. I don't think you need to mess with it much. Snorlax, I think, is doing fine. You could slightly buff it, but I think it's doing fine. What if you were going to buff it? I think you could actually buff Yawn a little bit, even though Yawn's not bad, especially when there are a lot of squishy attackers on the enemy team. But I think you could buff a little bit of Snorlax, and it wouldn't be crazy. Charizard, honestly, it's been so long since they've messed with Char. Huge buff is maybe not the right term. Maybe the real thought behind this category is just please buff. Maybe it's like please cuss. Huge, I don't think there are too many in the game, but please finally buff Charizard. It could use a few buffs, especially with the what looks like nerf to sort of how its attack is going to work. I think you definitely need to buff this thing. P is doing good. I like Pika. Don't mess with Pika. It's fine. Zeraora, we've buffed it multiple times recently. I think people are sleeping on it slightly. I would let it hang out for a bit. I think Zeraora is doing pretty cool. GY doing great, really strong, but I think Guard's doing really well in the game, and I think it's a cool place for it to be in. Blissey could probably still use a nerf. It's just a little. Its Unite move is still a little too broken, I think. It's one of the more broken Unites inside the entire game. Yeah, I would say put it the little nerf category. Momo Swine, you could give it a little buff. Mo's not doing too bad, by the way. If you hear me clear in my throat, it's because both of my kids are at home sick, and that means I'm also sick. Momo Swine could use a little buff. It doesn't need a lot. It's honestly pretty dang good. It's just it hasn't been messed with in a while, so I wouldn't mind seeing a little something Sylveon. Really good, just got buffs. Don't mess with it. Greedon, please buff. It's been way too long. They need to do something with Greedon. It's not the worst thing in the world, but it's kind of like a weird non-factor in a lot of a competitive play, and in you never see it. It needs some help. Zarina recently got buffs and buffs. It's good, especially in the hands of the right player. Please don't buff this thing. Oh my gosh, Dragonite, good, don't mess with it. I was underrating Dragonite for a little while. It's still really good. Tree, you could probably slightly nerf Tree. This is going to be controversial because actually I love Tree. A Trevon is so good and its stuns are insane. You could probably slightly nerf this Pokemon and it wouldn't be the end of the world, and in general defenders are just crazy good right now. I don't think it'd be crazy to give a slight Tree nerf. I don't want to see it, but I don't think it'd be insane. Sword, you could definitely give a little buff to AIS. Slash, it could use it for sure. It's just not as good as it used to be. It doesn't need a ton, but a little buff. And Iron Head, by the way, just has never really been good enough, especially that it only absorbs one attack. Maybe if it absorbed 2 attacks or something, it could be a little different, but yeah, a buff of Slash is reasonable. Hoopa Hoop is a weird one competitive. You could probably nerf it slightly, but I don't know if I'd even mess with it. I kind of like Hoopa's position in the game. Yeah, I don't think you'd really want to mess with Hoopa too much, honestly. Maybe they would do something to Shadow Ball to make it more playable, just cause the other move is so much better right now. But in general, I think Hoopa is great, but it doesn't destroy games, so I'm happy with it. Azumro could use a little buff, not nothing crazy, just a little buff to Azu would be nice. It's good, not great, and I think it falls behind a lot of the all-rounders. Espion, don't touch it, really good. Maybe a little too good. Don't touch it. Delphox, don't touch it. Another one that's really good, probably a little better solo than it is competitive, but even some teams are doing well with it competitively. Black and so dumb, such a dumb Pokemon. Been about being dumb. It's dumb all the time. It's dumb. GLA's dumb. Okay, you cannot have Pokemon in this game. Here's the thing. Here's the Glacken problem. This video will now be titled The Glacken Problem. Look, the problem with Glacken is this: you can't have moves and abilities inside Pokemon Unite that are so simple to use and also equivalent to something that's hard to use. So let's take an example of Zork and a Glacken right here. I'm just going to set them right next to each other. Glacken is so simple to use, it's crazy. It is an auto attacker. It can EAS easily, build up its sure hit move that can chase you across the entire map, doing insane damage with like max HP shred. Its nuts. Zorok, on the other hand, can do a lot of damage, but it's got to get next to you so you can easily stun it. It doesn't have a get out of jail free card. With its passive ability like Glacken, even though Illusionkin, you can make some plays with it, but Glacken literally has a passive that stops you from getting Seta, which is a crowd control effect like a stun knock-up slow. You have to then combo your moves and throughout that entire thing not get shut down by enemies that can all not easily target you, but that you're in range of being targeted by. Glacken requires none of that, and it does just as good, if not better, than Zoroark. Different roles, slightly different situations, but I think you're going to. You kind of understand what I'm saying, right? Zoroark, high skill, high reward. Pretty reasonable. Glacken, one of the lowest skills in the game. High reward, it's too much of something. Is super simple to play. The reward can't be as high as something that's complex to play. It just doesn't make any sense. Azaro, while I have him up there, I wouldn't mess with it really. I think it's really good, but I also think it really fits into that thought process of it's high skill, but when you have that skill level, it's really great. Buzzwell huge nerfs it. I mean, here's the weird thing: you could buff part of its kit. Like, please buff Leech Life, please nerf Smackdown Superpower. It's too good. It's too good competitively. It's too good if anyone knows what they're doing. With this Pokemon, it's one of the most busted things in the entire game. It's so unbelievably good. You really need to Nerf Buzzlets, it's too good and I love it, but it's too good Tar could use a little buff. I think it's I think it's not as bad as some people think. Stone Edge could absolutely use a buff. And in general, you've got this situation where again, it's kind of like a Glacken. Problem if Glacken is good at level 4-ish. We'll say 6 once it gets a second move. And it gets its United 8 and Tyranitar is not actually even decent until 9. You would think that by the end game, Tyranitar would be so much better than Glacken that it would kind of even out. But it's not so. For that reason, you have to buff Tyranitar if things like the EVs are in the game, and they're good. At level 4 or 6 Unite move at 8, while Tar is still not evolved until 9. Like it doesn't make any sense. Knew they nerfed it, and it actually seems to be in the Zor AR camp like really good, but you need skill to play it, and it's not so broken that if you don't have a Mew you're crying about it. It's not even getting that much competitive play anymore. I think it's in a totally fine state. Dryo, you already nerfed it. I don't think you need to mess with it again. They might because they hate my freaking birds, but I don't think you need to again. It's high skill, high reward. You want things like that in the game, but I could see them messing with do again because they just seem to hate me personally. Okay, who's next? Okay, next we have Scissor. I would like please buff here, please Scissor. Scyther, these Pokemon, they don't need massive buffs, but nothing in the game needs a buff so big that it's going to like shake the very foundation of the game. Right, they do need buffs though. They've needed buffs for a while. I would just really like them to be way more relevant inside the meta, so I would say please buff Scissor and Scyther. It could be somewhat minor a little bit here or there, and these Pokemon get a lot better. And I actually do think these buffs are probably coming, given that we have some epic hollowware coming for these Pokemon CL able. I don't know if I need to say it, but you need a nerf Cliff A. It's so dumb. A lot of the supporters are great. You want them to be great, but you don't want them to be healing 200,000 a game. Great, it just makes the game so unbalanced when one team has one like a CFAEL and the other team has maybe a kind of like mid-tier level supporter. It's just like completely out of whack. Sabby Y is a weird one. You could not touch Sabally Y, and that would be fine. You could also slightly buff Shadow Sneak, and that would be fine. I think this is a hard Pokemon to balance, really hard, because its gameplay mechanics are so different from pretty much everything in the entire game. I would say little buff not huge because it's pretty dang good. It's just one of the what the other thing about Sabally Y is it's really good, and people who play it are not very good. And I'm not trying to be mean when I say that, it's just there are a lot of bad Sab players. It's kind of like Talon Flame. For whatever reason, there's so many bad Talon Flame players, they feel like they're supposed to never fight. Only Batcap say EY is kind of in that same boat, so it could use a little buff. But be careful, we've got TU Dark Bear is fine. It's getting some comp play, and it's good. Dark Bear is good. Water Bear I think is bad right now, and I can't believe I'm saying this, but I think you should buff her Sherfu. I know if you don't agree, and you don't want her Sherfu buffed, I'm not against it. Just understand this Pokemon is like so unbelievably underwhelming. It's kind of sad to see Water Bear right now in the hands of a great player. It could still do okay, but I think with a Pokemon that like combos like that and requires like kind of like a high micro level of skill with it at times, I think it could be a little better in the game, a little bit better. Dragapult Dragons and nerf, I don't think it's a huge nerf. It was just buffed, and it really never got any play. I don't want to see a Pokemon become completely irrelevant for no reason, right? Even with the nerf this with fire, I still want the Pokemon to be relevant. It's just some of these are a little too much. I would say Dragapult needs some slight nerfs, nothing crazy. Very minor. Comcom's kid is not good. Com is set up in a way that is just not healthy for the game. It's not a healthy Pokemon for the game balance, so I think in general you could nerf this thing into the ground and it would be fine. Maybe release Com was the way to go with this Pokemon, even though it felt very underwhelming, because the tough thing about it is this Pokemon is a bad play style for an uncoordinated 5v5 game, because it gives a super unfair advantage to a team, or it's a complete troll pick for a team. So because of that, honestly, if there was a category that was like remove this from the game, K would be at the top of my list. It's just a horrible design for a game like this. And yeah, I hate it. Gudra is pretty good. I like it. It doesn't need huge buffs, doesn't need a huge nerfs. I like Gudra a lot. I think it's cool. Keep doing you, buddy. Lapras, I don't think it's as bad as people think. I honestly don't. I think people are sleeping on Lapras a little just 'cause it got nerfed. It's more of an all-rounder than a defender right now, and because of that I could see some people almost wanting some buffs for it after the nerfs they gave it. I'm fine with Lapras where it is as long as we do this next thing and nerf Umbreon like crazy. Umbreon is so dumb. Mean look is so dumb. This Pokemon is so dumb. I do like playing it but this Pokemon is so incredibly stupid, and mean look is one of the dumbest abilities in the game. Please, please, please nerf Umbreon, I beg. You Candle's doing good. You don't need to mess with it. It's a really strong Pokemon, but it's good. Leafeon's a weird one. I think you can nerf it, especially because of how it's getting played competitively. Right, but I don't hate Leafeon's position in the game. It feels at least like unlike Glacken and Umbreon, like Umbreon's insanely tanky, and Glacken can fight from 8 million miles away. At least Leafeon has to get next to things to do. Something you can nerf its early game a little bit. You could probably nerf all the EV's early game a little bit, but Inteleon was really not nerfed. They only nerfed liquidation. Essentially, you can still nerf multiple parts of Inteleon kit. This Pokemon is too good. It's way too good in the game. Especially in the hands of someone skilled. You do wanted to have a nice payoff when you're hitting snipe shots. But if a snipe shot right now does 3k damage, it could easily do 2k damage and be just fine. So yeah, I think you could easily nerf this Pokemon. Blaziken's fine. Mimikyu, I would like to see a buff to a Trick Room. I would like to see a Trick Room buff. Blazin is doing great and it's really good, but it's not broken. I like it. A Mimikyu is also doing really well. The only thing I would change is just Trick Room, because that move just does not work. Mosquera might get some buffs because of it. Battle Pass coming out, which wouldn't be crazy because it's not broken, but I do think the problem with a lot of speedsters is just the player base is not great with them, so it's not that Meowscarada really needs a lot of buffs. It's that you have to play Meowscarada really well to get good value out of it. I wouldn't mess with it, but you might see a little buff. A Metagross is fine, really good. The buffs for it are great. You could slightly buff different parts of its kit. You could slightly buff Zen Headbutt or something like that, but in general, it's got a playstyle difference between Zen and Magnet Rise. Both a Muro Ball and Meteor Mash are really good. I think it's in a great spot. I wouldn't mess with it. And now Gyarados. Please buff but you're not surprised to see Gyarados in the please buff category, right? I mean, Gyarados needs some buffs. It's another one of these Pokemon that have been released that are fine, not amazing. They're just fine, and it's unfortunate to have an underwhelming Pokemon for a little while. And I think we will see some Gyarados buffs, and as far as Meridian coming to the game very soon, I mean, it'll probably need a nerf. Honestly, that thing is, I think it's going to be really strong. I don't even know if it's going to be playable and ranked, but there you go. Here all the Pokemon I think that need buffs, big buffs, maybe little buffs. Mostly the roster is balanced, and you could have some little nerfs. And a few Pokemon that I think you just need to nerf like crazy. There you have it, folks. A comprehensive look at the new nerfs and buffs rocking the Pokémon Unite tier list in 2024. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the meta, don't forget to hit that like button, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more gaming content. As the meta continues to evolve, we'll be right here, keeping you updated on all things Pokémon Unite. Until next time, happy gaming, trainers.